Picture this. Early morning in the Persian Gulf, the sun barely cresting over the shimmering water. Somewhere in one of the most strategically vital maritime passages on the planet, a fleet of American warships assumes position. Engines running, weapons systems armed, orders received. The United States Navy has just been tasked with a mission never before undertaken in modern history: blockading the Strait of Hormuz, not Iran. The United States, the very waterway that channels a significant portion of the world's oil supply. The same narrow choke point that, if closed, sends gas prices surging from Paris to Tokyo. The very passage Iran has wielded as a weapon since the war began. And now, the United States is about to lock it down completely. This is not a drill. This is not a threat. As of Monday, the 13th of April, 2026 at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the United States Central Command officially began enforcing a naval blockade of all maritime traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports in coastal areas, and the world is holding its breath. The roots of this moment trace back to February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched a joint air campaign against Iran. Within hours, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was killed. That single event altered everything. In retaliation, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, did what analysts had long feared. They effectively shut down the strait. Warnings echoed over VHF radio to every vessel. No ships permitted to pass. The closure was never formally declared a blockade. Iran avoided that terminology, but it was irrelevant. Military and industry sources made clear that safety could not be guaranteed. Within days, ship tracking data revealed a 70% reduction in traffic. 70%. Let that sink in. Roughly 20% of the world's oil and 20% of liquefied natural gas normally flows through this narrow channel. In mere hours, most of it stopped. Shipments were restricted by more than 90%, approximately 10 million barrels of oil per day. Energy costs and agricultural inputs surged worldwide. Brent crude jumped 10 to 13% in early trading, with analysts warning prices could reach $100 per barrel or higher if disruptions continued. And then they did. Oil surged past $100 per barrel. Gas prices climbed across the United States and Europe. Supply chains buckled under pressure. Yet Iran quietly kept its own exports flowing, selling crude at a premium while the rest of the world bore the cost. According to Kepler Analytics, as reported by CNN, Iran exported an average of 1.85 million barrels of crude per day through March, roughly 1,000,000 barrels per day more than in the prior 3 months. Iran was not merely surviving the war, it was profiting. Here is where it becomes both remarkable and infuriating. While global economies bled, while tanker crews feared for their lives, and while 230 loaded oil tankers sat stranded inside the Gulf, Iran established what Lloyd's List intelligence analysts called a de facto toll booth regime. Vessels were required to submit full documentation, obtain clearance codes, and accept IRGC escorted passage through a single controlled corridor. At least 2 vessels reportedly paid Iran fees in Chinese yuan, as high as $2 million per ship, to guarantee safe passage. Trump called this world extortion, posting directly that leaders, especially of the United States, will never be extorted. Then came the summit in Pakistan, a 20-hour meeting that changed everything. On the weekend of April 12th, the highest-level face-to-face talks between American and Iranian leaders since the 1979 Islamic Revolution occurred in Islamabad. 47 years had passed since such senior negotiations. The U.S. delegation, led by the Vice President and accompanied by key envoys, faced Iran's top representatives, including the Speaker of Parliament and Foreign Minister. Pakistani mediators, having brokered the fragile 2-week ceasefire that enabled these talks, hosted the delegations at a luxury hotel near the convention center. There was optimism in the air. Pakistani officials greeted each side with smiles and handshakes, and a sense lingered that a breakthrough might occur. 21 hours later, it did not. The vice president emerged at 6 a.m. local time and declared that while substantive discussions had taken place, no agreement had been reached. The list of unresolved issues was staggering: ending uranium enrichment, dismantling enrichment facilities, returning stockpiles, accepting broader regional peace arrangements, halting Iran's funding of proxy groups, and most urgently, fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz without tolls or conditions. Iran refused all demands. Their counterposition included controlling the strait, receiving war reparations, a regional ceasefire, and the release of frozen assets abroad. Iran's foreign minister framed the negotiations as progressing to the brink of a potential memorandum of understanding, but accused the United States of maximalism, shifting goalposts, and blockade threats. The American framing was just as stark, an unequivocal demand that Iran affirmatively commit to never pursue nuclear weapons or the means to rapidly achieve them. Iran refused. That refusal set the stage for the most dramatic lever available, the United States preparing to act. Within hours of the failed talks, the president issued what can only be described as a declaration of maritime war. On social media, he wrote, "Effective, immediately, the United States Navy, the finest in the world, will begin the process of blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz." Every vessel that had paid a toll to Iran was to be sought out and interdicted. The warning was unmistakable. Any Iranian firing at U.S. forces or peaceful vessels would face immediate destruction. U.S. Central Command confirmed the order shortly afterward, specifying that the blockade would commence on Monday, the 13th of April, 2026, at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, applied impartially to all nations' vessels entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas. Importantly, transit to and from non-Iranian ports would not be impeded. The goal was not to stop global trade, but to strangle Iran's economy. Strategically, this created a paradox. For weeks, the United States had demanded Iran reopen the strait, calling their closure an act of extortion. Gas prices had surged across America. A CBS News poll reported 64% of Americans disapproved of how the president was handling the Iran war, and 66% said administration goals had not been clearly explained. Yet now, the very strait once pressured to open was being blockaded. Analysts explained the logic as economic warfare. Brookings Institution senior fellow Robin Brooks argued the U.S. could implode Iran's economy by cutting off oil exports, which might reopen the strait faster than any other measure. Iran had been selling its oil while holding the world hostage. A U.S. blockade eliminated that revenue stream entirely. With China purchasing approximately 90% of Iran's exports, roughly 1.7 million barrels per day, Beijing faced immediate pressure to lobby Iran into a deal. The blockade also provided leverage without destroying Iran's oil infrastructure, a precision scalpel rather than a sledgehammer, at least in theory. But the risks were enormous. Iran understood that controlling the strait was its main leverage, and by announcing a blockade, the United States made clear it intended to strip that advantage by force. Iran responded immediately. The IRGC warned any military vessel approaching the strait would be treated as a ceasefire violation. 2 U.S. warships had already entered the strait for mine clearance operations, which the U.S. described as ensuring freedom of navigation, while Iran called it a ceasefire violation. The margin for misinterpretation was wide. Complicating matters, Iran had laid sea mines in the strait after the war began, and reportedly lost track of some. They could not fully guarantee safe passage, which placed U.S. forces in the position of destroying these mines, a task fraught with risk, accidental detonations, misidentifications, and the ever-present threat of direct confrontation. The first casualties had already been felt. On March 1st, the tanker Skylight was struck north of Kasab, Oman, killing 2 Indian crew members and injuring 3. The MKD Vyom was hit by a drone boat, causing a fire and explosion. 1 Indian sailor was killed. These were not statistics, they were human lives lost to the escalating conflict. Internationally, the U.S. was not entirely alone, but support was limited. The president mentioned allied assistance, including the UK sending minesweepers. Yet both CBS News and CNN reported that the UK would not join the blockade. A spokesperson emphasized support for freedom of navigation and the reopening of the strait to protect the global economy, but stopped short of committing to direct action. Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, questioned the logic, highlighting the strategic contradiction. How would blockading the strait compel Iran to reopen it? The theory behind the blockade was calculated. Iran's economy, already under severe strain, could collapse faster without oil revenues, forcing the regime to the negotiating table under terms favorable to the United States. China, deprived of cheap Iranian crude, would have an incentive to pressure Iran into compliance. In the short term, the blockade might spike oil prices, but if it led to a swift end to hostilities, long-term prices could stabilize. Yet, if Iran responded militarily, firing on U.S. ships or proxies, the fragile ceasefire could collapse, resuming full-scale war. Pakistan's leadership continued urging adherence to the ceasefire and offered to host further talks, leaving a narrow diplomatic window open. As of Monday morning, U.S. Central Command confirmed the blockade was in effect at 10 a.m. Eastern. The IRGC issued warnings that any military vessels in the strait would be considered ceasefire violations. Iran's foreign minister accused the United States of maximalism and bad faith at the negotiating table. 2 U.S. warships were already conducting mine clearance operations. The president threatened China with a 50% tariff if Beijing supplied missiles to Iran. Technically, peace talks remained possible, but they were practically suspended. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. Analysts outlined several possible scenarios. Scenario 1. The blockade succeeds. Cut off from oil revenues. Iran's economy collapses rapidly. China, facing tariffs and loss of crude, pressures Iran to return to the negotiating table. A new round of talks begins before April 22nd. A deal is struck, probably imperfect, likely short of all U.S. demands, but sufficient to end the shooting and reopen the strait. Gas prices fall, markets stabilize, and a fragile, contested peace emerges. Scenario 2. The blockade triggers escalation. IRGC forces attack U.S. warships directly or via proxies. The ceasefire collapses. U.S. airstrikes resume. The war, paused for 2 weeks, erupts anew. The strait remains closed for months. Oil prices stay above $100 per barrel, and the world edges toward a broader regional conflict, drawing in more players. Scenario 3. Stalemate. The blockade is enforced, but neither side fires first. Iran refuses to capitulate but does not escalate. The ceasefire barely holds past April 22nd, extended cautiously through Pakistani brokered negotiations. Talks resume slowly, with neither side giving ground. It is a grinding, exhausting middle path possible, but fragile. Each scenario carries profound implications for energy markets, the Middle East, U.S.-China relations, and regional security architecture. The next 48 to 72 hours may determine the course of the crisis. The Strait of Hormuz, only 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, has been a flashpoint for nearly 4 decades. In 1988, tensions sparked Operation Praying Mantis, the largest U.S. naval battle since World War II. In 2011 and 2012, Iran threatened closure amid nuclear standoffs. In 2019, tankers were sabotaged in the Gulf of Oman. Yet none of these incidents reached this level. None involved a declared U.S. blockade, a ceasefire under active negotiation, or multiple casualties among cargo crews. The stakes are immediate. Mines are in the water. Warships are positioned. Deadlines loom on the calendar. What happens next will shape the Middle East for a generation. It will determine whether Iran's nuclear ambitions are contained or accelerated. It will test the resilience of the global economy, already strained by tariffs and post-pandemic disruptions. It will define American power projection in the 21st century. Can the United States sustain a naval blockade of one of the world's busiest maritime choke points against a nation that has repeatedly absorbed punishment? Does Iran have sufficient popular support and economic reserves to outlast it? Can Pakistan, one of the few trusted intermediaries, keep diplomatic channels open long enough for a deal to emerge? No one has all the answers yet. What is clear is this: the world is watching. Tankers wait, warships are in position. The clock ticks toward April 22nd. The blockade affects more than nations. It touches every individual reliant on the fragile web of global trade. Energy prices rise, food costs increase, shipping delays ripple through supply chains. Ordinary families from Douala to Detroit to Delhi feel the impact. This is what a choke point war looks like in practice. And while the naval blockade adds pressure, there remains a buried truth both sides understand. War is costly, peace is difficult, and the strait must open eventually. Kamun Lange. Comment, like, subscribe.